The duration is 106 minutes, but the reversal is as high as 43 times, with a rating of 8.8 points from 1.3 million people in a certain half. This Spanish suspense movie about the roller coaster market became a global sensation as soon as it was released. It has been remade into an Italian version with no evidence, a Korean version with confessions, and an upcoming domestic movie with hidden secrets. Due to its brain-burning plot, intricate clues, and sudden twists, the audience deeply understands what you think is what you think. Next, I will use a 10,000-word copy in 30 minutes to try my best to sort out all the incomparable and detailed information buried by the director, so that you can understand this suspenseful masterpiece clearly and clearly. The reason why this film is so stunning after watching is because it uses a structure of 4 parts and 3 story versions to foreshadow everything, with layers of reversal and a combination of virtual and real elements. The first part is a nearly 10-minute opening statement, in which the director uses the male lead's voice to explain the case to the audience. The story takes place in Spain in 2016, where the male protagonist is accused of murder by the police. As a result, his hotel is under 24-hour surveillance, but he argues that he was framed. In order to get rid of the suspicion of murder, he invited gold medal lawyer Goodman to defend himself. This person has been in the industry for 20 years, but has never lost a lawsuit. Goodman arrived at the male lead's hotel room as scheduled. After the two met, the male lead appeared very surprised because Goodman arrived 3 hours earlier than the agreed time. Goodman explained that time was tight, and the prosecution had found a witness to the male lead's murder and would appear in court in 3 hours to testify. For this, Goodman did 2 very important things. Firstly, he took out a clock, which appeared to be reminding the male lead of the urgency of time. Secondly, he demanded that the male lead truthfully explain the details of the case, otherwise he would not be able to provide more defense in court. And throughout the entire game between the two, Woodman kept provoking the male lead with details and time constraints. Is his goal really that simple on the surface? At the end, we can delve deeper into the interpretation of the male lead and have to start from scratch to recall the incident. Originally, the male protagonist and renowned photographer Laura got married separately, but both had an affair. The two had been secretly dating for several months. However, not long ago, the male protagonist received an anonymous text message, claiming to know about his relationship with Laura and taking the opportunity to extort €100,000 in sealing fees. Fearing that the scandal would affect his career and marriage, the male protagonist, based on the transaction location provided by the other party, went to a remote hotel 300 kilometers away with Laura. However, the two of them waited for a long time, and the other person never appeared. Instead, they sent a text message to the male lead using Laura's phone, stating that I wanted to reveal everything about room 715 in the hotel. They felt it was a trap and were ready to leave. However, just as the male lead was packing up, he was suddenly attacked by a dark shadow behind him, and the male lead ran into the mirror and fainted. When he woke up again, there was a hurried knocking from the police outside the door. The male lead is not sure what exactly happened, but just as he was about to open the door, he found a bloody weapon lying on the ground, and his lover Laura had mysteriously died in the room. At this moment, the police happened to break through the door. The male protagonist raised his hands and tried to explain that there was another perpetrator, but the police searched the room and did not find any figures. The room was also locked with anti-theft chains from the inside, and there were no signs of windows being opened or damaged. In addition, hotel witnesses claimed that they had heard screams at the time, but no one had left the room. Therefore, the crime scene presented a perfect state of secrecy, making the male protagonist the biggest suspect arrested. The police suspect that he attempted to bribe Laura to protect his marriage, so they killed her. However, the male lead always claims to have been framed and even shed a tear after recounting, but this cannot deceive Goodman. He took out a newspaper with a briefing on the disappearance of young Daniel. As a result, the movie transitions to the second part, and the next nearly 50 minutes will be a version of the story told by the male lead. It should be noted that this narrative is completely one-sided by the male lead, and its starting point is to exonerate oneself. Therefore, this version of the story must be intertwined with reality and illusion. The story takes place 3 months ago. The male protagonist uses a business trip to Paris as an excuse to secretly meet his wife's lover Laura. The two of them spend the night playing poker in a remote Mountain View room. After driving out of the Mountain View room, the director planted 2 foreshadowings in advance. He deliberately gave a shot, and Laura enjoyed the scenery while filming. In addition, in Laura's camera, there are intimate photos taken by the two of them when they were torn apart. The car passed through a fork in the road and reached zero navigation, indicating the route to the right. However, in order to catch the plane, the male protagonist chose to turn into the lost road on the left, citing that it was faster to take this road. You can clearly see the elk sign on the road here. Then the two started chatting, discussing whether they should continue lying to maintain their secret relationship. At the moment when the male protagonist was distracted, an accident suddenly occurred. A deer crossed the road from left to right, and the male protagonist instinctively turned the steering wheel to the left, but it collided with a passing car. After the car accident, the two of them nervously stepped forward to check, but to their surprise, the boy driving had already received the boxed lunch on the spot. There is a question that needs further interpretation, whether this car accident was an accident or simply a driver's accident. We temporarily pressed the button here, and the male protagonist was frightened and panicked by the scene before him. He immediately planned to choose to call the police, but was stopped by Laura because he found that the other person was not only not wearing a seatbelt, but also playing with his phone while driving. The male protagonist claimed to have taken the other person's lane, while Laura cunningly argued that it was all due to the elk. If we report to the police now, others will know about their relationship. We will definitely be ruined by then. In addition, there are no witnesses in the wilderness and mountains. After weighing the pros and cons, the male protagonist decided to leave here. However, the car never caught fire. Even worse, Laura noticed a car driving this way. Seeing that the situation was not good, Laura came up with a quick idea. He quickly put the boy down, took out a pen and paper from the car, pretended to be the driver of the vehicle, and pretended to negotiate a solution with the male lead. At this moment, the vehicle stopped curiously and the man asked if they needed help. Laura quickly explained that it was just a minor accident and refused the man's kindness. But just then, the boy's phone rang. Laura calmly returned to the car, hung up her phone, and pretended to pick it up to answer. But the bloodstains left on the car made Laura nervous. He quickly blocked it with his body, and the driver who passed by didn't notice anything unusual. Then the driver flew away, but Laura casually stuffed the boy's phone into her pocket. Because of this witness, there is a subsequent occurrence of the destruction of the body below. After the two of them stuffed the boy into the trunk, Laura suggested that the male lead be responsible for handling the body, while she stayed in place for help. The male protagonist drove the car to a secluded corner. Just as he was about to drive the boy and his car into the lake, a strange sound came from the forest. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. After confirming that it was just a lost one, the male protagonist pushed the boy and his car into the lake. Watching the sinking car, his heart collapsed to the extreme. Subsequently, the male protagonist called Laura with a prepaid phone card and told him his location. Laura, who had repaired the vehicle, picked up the male protagonist. However, at this moment, Laura looked frightened. It turned out that just after Laura finished calling the player, a kind-hearted uncle happened to drive by. When he found out that Laura's car had broken down, the uncle opened the engine bag to help him check and found that the problem was with the engine sensor. The car needed to be taken to his home for repair. Uncle used to be an engineer at BMW and now runs an auto repair shop. He drags Laura's car towards his home. As the two of them chatted on the way, the director buried some clever details. Uncle and wife met him through the production team, and his wife was a literature professor and also a very skilled theatrical performer. At this moment, her husband called Laura and the director explained in detail that he was working at the bank. When the car arrived at home, the aunt noticed that Laura's wrist was stained with blood, and Laura lied that it was only blood. The aunt invited her into the room to have coffee and clean the wound, while the uncle started repairing the car. When looking at the photos on the cabinet in the living room, the camera first took two masks that looked very similar to human skin, which was an important foreshadowing laid by the director, and the uncle noticed a 2-halogen lighter on the passenger seat while repairing the car. Returning to the living room, the aunt talked to Laura about her son Daniel, but Laura was stunned when she saw the photo because the person in the photo was the boy they had hit and killed during the day. At this moment, Daniel's friend happened to call and ask Aunt where Daniel is. Laura suddenly understood that the phone she hung up during the day was from Daniel's friend. He panicked and immediately picked up his bag, feeling guilty, ready to leave. And when Aunt realized something was wrong, she quickly dialed Daniel's phone number. Laura, who was just about to leave, realized that Daniel's phone was in her pocket. Although the urgent bell rang, Laura hid her phone under the sofa in a hurry. Uncle and Aunt followed the bell to the living room, and Aunt dialed Daniel's phone again. Following the sound, the uncle found his phone under the sofa. Aunt felt extremely strange about this. He remembered that Daniel would always bring his phone when he went out. Seeing it exposed, Laura hurriedly left on the grounds of darkness and darkness. As Laura watched her leave, her instinctive adjustment of the driver's seat caught the uncle's extra attention. Therefore, when Laura left, the uncle took a look and noted down the license plate number. But at this moment, he was completely unaware that his son had been killed, and the woman he had just seen off was one of the perpetrators. For safety reasons, Laura, who was still feeling anxious, had a new idea. They sent the car to the dismantling factory for destruction, and the two agreed not to see each other again in the future. After returning, the male protagonist immediately reported to the police, falsely claiming that his car had been stolen in the parking lot and pretending to have just returned from Paris. However, just as he thought he could get rid of this incident, inevitable things happened. The police received a report of Daniel's disappearance, and the male protagonist's memories came to an abrupt end. Goodman's phone rang, and the informant on the other end of the phone came reliable news. The prosecution witness had already arrived in court, so time was very tight for the male lead. However, at this time, the male lead did not trust Goodman and requested to talk to his cooperating lawyer Felix. Felix was surprised by the appearance of the new political figure and asked the male lead to give the phone to Goodman. Goodman picked up his phone and walked towards the window. At this moment, Felix inexplicably heard a noise, while Goodman kept looking at the opposite building. The issue of the noise here needs further analysis, so we will temporarily ignore it. After the call, Goodman said a meaningful sentence. Then the male protagonist continued to reminisce, and the police quickly found his head because on a lost road, the police found traces of two cars colliding, and Daniel's father provided important clues. On the day of Daniel's disappearance, he happened to meet the woman whose car broke down at the accident site, so the police speculated that there was another hidden truth. The uncle provided the police with the license plate number recorded at the time, which was officially registered under the male protagonist's name after investigation. However, Laura did not reveal her real name at that time, so the police found the male protagonist and asked him if he knew the woman in the painting. At this moment, the door suddenly opened, and the guilty male lead was frightened by the sound of the door opening. Lawyer Felix quickly explained to the police that the male lead's vehicle was stolen in the parking lot, and at the time of the incident, the male lead was still on a business trip in Paris. Therefore, the male lead temporarily cleared himself of suspicion. However, Felix realized that the male protagonist was hiding something. Under his coercion, the male protagonist admitted that he was not in Paris at the time, but with his lover. In order not to affect the company, he asked Felix to persuade the police through connections to forge an alibi, and the matter came to a temporary end. Until that day, a news caught the attention of the male lead, and the police ruled out the possibility of Daniel being killed. Because the police investigation found that Daniel embezzled 50,000 euros from the bank where he worked, it is speculated that he pretended to be missing in order to escape. The male protagonist, who was unaware of the truth, took a risk and arranged for Laura to meet, but by then Laura had already changed her face. What shocked the male protagonist was that the woman in front of him, with a heart full of snakes and scorpions, chose to resort to any means to completely solve the problem. On the day of the crime, he hid Daniel in the trunk and secretly took Daniel's wallet, discovering that he was a bank employee, and Laura's father-in-law was a senior executive of the bank. So one day while her husband was taking a shower, Laura secretly took out his trading device, logged into the internal system of the bank, and transferred 50,000 euros to Daniel's account, forging the illusion that Daniel had embezzled public funds. The male lead feels that Laura's actions are too extreme and tells Laura that the police have found him on the head. Laura threatens the male lead not to reveal herself. The director collected a foreshadowing here, and the evidence photo Laura mentioned was the intimate photo of the two people stored in his camera. The two eventually parted ways unhappily, but the male lead discovered a man standing outside, who was a witness on the day of the car accident. In the following days, the male lead's company successfully entered the Asian market with advanced technology, and he was also named Entrepreneur of the Year. Everything seems to be moving in a positive direction. But on that day, at the awards ceremony, Daniel's father pretended to be a journalist and sneaked into the venue, asking the male lead some questions in person. Originally, the uncle had long suspected that Laura was an accomplice. The couple had explained to the police that before the woman whose car broke down arrived at his house, according to Daniel's phone call records, he had used his phone even after leaving the house. So how could the phone be left at home? The only possibility is that the mobile phone was brought by a woman, and Uncle remembered clearly that the woman adjusted the driver's seat after getting on the car, which means that he was not the driver before, and the reason why he lied must be to protect someone. When the police talked to the male lead that day, the couple was in the adjacent room. For the male lead, at this moment, the uncle and aunt are invisible guests. The police took out the plane ticket and hotel reservation, and told the uncle that the male lead had an alibi. Although it doesn't necessarily mean anything, the couple still believed the police, until they returned home and found news that their son was a thief. The couple firmly believed that their son would never do anything illegal, so the uncle concluded that it was a conspiracy. He tried his best to explain to the police that the male lead was an accomplice, but the power made the dangerous and vicious person even stronger. The police did not believe or care about the uncle's words, so the uncle came straight to the male protagonist and deliberately borrowed a fire from him. The male protagonist took out a local luxury gold lighter and looked at him. The uncle was even more certain of his judgment because while helping Laura repair the car, he noticed that there was only the same type of lighter on the car. Despite the fact, the male lead still refuses to admit it. Subsequently, the uncle was dragged out of the venue by security personnel and then taken to the police station for questioning. At this time, Felix and the sheriff were in the adjacent room. For Uncle, the power symbolized by the sheriff at this moment is the invisible guest. After the male lead's narration, Goodman finally figured out the ins and outs of the matter. It's 10. The above paragraph contains a huge amount of information, and we need further in-depth analysis. The first point is to pay attention to Goodman's act of putting the bottom down. The second point is to analyze Goodman's motives, because so far, the police do not know whether the car accident or Daniel is alive or dead, and the male protagonist has sheltered or covered up the car accident. Therefore, from the male protagonist's perspective, he does not want anyone to mix Laura's murder with Daniel's disappearance. At least he does not want the car accident to be discovered. But Goodman killed Laura and Daniel went missing. These two seemingly unrelated cases seem to be related, and on the surface, they want to help the male lead find the invisible guest, who is the culprit who framed the male lead for killing Laura's disease. But is this really his intention? Following Goodman's guidance, the male lead proceeded to refine his own version of the story. He believes that the murderer of Laura must be the eyewitness who passed by the scene of the car accident, because he had received a letter before, in which the eyewitness sent Daniel as the sender and sent him a ransom message. In addition, a photo of the dumping ground is also attached. In order to prevent the incident from happening, the male lead had to follow the witness's request and rush to the designated car exhibition with Laura. Afterwards, the opening paragraph occurred, but Goodman had a big question after listening. How did the witness know about the male protagonist of the reservoir who threw the body and speculated that the witness might have seen something? This led to suspicion, so he pretended to leave and followed the male protagonist all the way. After capturing evidence, he extorted money from the male protagonist, and the movements that the male protagonist heard before near the reservoir may not be as simple as the deer. However, Goodman does not think so. If the witness was really trying to extort, why didn't he take the money with him? Secondly, how can he freely enter and exit a room that resembles a secret room without leaving any trace? Finally, what is the point of borrowing Laura's phone to send text messages? Faced with the three questions raised by Goodman, the male lead couldn't answer any of them. Obviously, his testimony was full of loopholes and was not enough to convince the judge in court. So, the movie transitions to the third part, and the next 20 minutes are the story version told by Goodman, listening to how he helps the male lead solve the above three problems. From the result of killing without seeking wealth, it can be seen that the killer's purpose should be to seek revenge. Goodman inferred that the culprit was Daniel's father, as he already suspected that his son had been killed by the male lead and Laura. What confuses the male lead is how the uncle can quietly leave the room. Goodman told him a small story about horizontal thinking. In an empty wooden granary, a man was hanging from the center of the beam. It is known that the hemp rope that hung him was 3 meters long, and his feet were 30 centimeters above the ground. However, the wall closest to him was 6 meters away. How did a man hang himself? The answer is that the deceased placed a large ice block under their feet, and as the ice gradually melted, the rope gradually tightened until they finally suffocated themselves. Goodman's metaphor is extremely clever. He foreshadows the fate of the male protagonist, who is trying to get rid of the suspicion of murder. He desperately wants to find an ice block to cushion his feet, but never wants to wait for his zombie to die after cushioning his feet. Because he was gradually bringing his neck closer to the rope loop designed by Goodman for him. Goodman took out a police photo file and told the male lead that the answer was in it. He pointed to a hotel staff member behind the male lead when he was arrested, who was the uncle's wife Goodman. He speculated that everything was set up by the uncle, and he threw photos and recordings as bait. The male lead was indeed hooked, and he followed his request, which exposed that the male lead and Laura were the culprits. After Laura threw away her phone as required, the uncle picked it up and brought it back. Subsequently, he went to book a hotel together. Uncle's wife is a hotel staff member. With his cooperation, Uncle sneaked into the room in advance. His wife first opened the window of the neighboring room and then handed the window opening tool to Uncle. Uncle hid in the wardrobe and waited until the male lead and Laura entered the room. At this moment, for both of them, Uncle was the invisible guest. Later, he used Laura's phone to send a text message to the male lead. When the two realized it was a trap and were about to leave, the uncle waited for an opportunity to knock the male lead unconscious. He then used decorations to beat Laura to death, and then set up a scene to frame and blame the male lead. He deliberately left money in Laura's phone, and also left the male lead's fingerprints on the murder weapon. At this moment, other tenants heard the fighter knocking on the door, while the uncle locked the room from the inside with an anti-theft chain and then escaped through his wife's bad route. He used tools to open the window and flip it outside, then pulled down the window to make the room a semi-closed room. He then followed the eaves to the neighboring room where his wife had opened the window in advance, locked the window and returned the window opening tool, and left the hotel as if nothing had happened. The police officer who received the report and broke into the hotel room immediately focused on the male lead and the body, while the uncle's wife took the opportunity to lock the window from the inside. So the murder scene has become a perfect secret room. The two successfully avenged each other, and Laura framed the male lead, which explains why they chose a remote hotel 300 kilometers away for the transaction. The reason why the police did not suspect that Ant was related to Laura's murder in subsequent investigations was precisely because Felix wiped the male lead clean from Daniel's case. Seeing this, I wonder if you have noticed the version of the story provided by Goodman, which unknowingly puts the male lead in a dilemma. That is to say, the male protagonist admits to being related to Daniel's disappearance, so that when investigating Laura's murder, the police will consider Daniel's parents' motives. This will give the male protagonist the opportunity to clear the suspicion of killing Laura or continue to cover up the truth about Daniel's disappearance. The male protagonist will be the only suspect in killing Laura, which is Goodman's true motive. So how can the male lead get rid of the suspicion of killing Laura while ruling out his involvement in the disappearance of Daniel? At this moment, Goodman's phone rang, and his informant brought bad news. The witness found by the prosecution was the driver who passed by at the time of the crime. The male protagonist feels like he's finished with holding a chicken, but Goodman offers another set of excuses. The male protagonist has an alibi for a business trip to Paris, and the Mountain View room where they played wild games is registered under Laura's name. Therefore, they can easily blame Laura for the car accident, the body dumping, and the fake image of Daniel stealing public funds and fleeing. The license plate is only indirect evidence, and the male protagonist can also say that he went to the hotel because Laura asked for help, which can turn the male protagonist into an unaware victim. How can we make the police believe that the person who threw the body is Laura? Goodman believes there is a credible way to find the car and put Laura's personal belongings on it, and then choose to report it anonymously. The only charge for the male lead is to conceal the accident. Goodman used comparison and maps to ask the male protagonist to circle the location of the body being thrown, but the male protagonist discovered a loophole in his testimony. The eyewitness had seen him at the scene of a car accident. If witnesses choose to cooperate with the prosecution, then this set of alibis is simply untenable. For this reason, the male protagonist had already entrusted Felix to find the witness in advance and prepared to bribe Woodman with money. Only then did he admit that the prosecution had not found the witness. The reason why he fabricated this false news was to force the male protagonist to tell the truth as soon as possible. At this moment, the male protagonist confidently told Goodman that he had always known his uncle was the murderer, because when he was taken away by the police, he noticed his uncle's wife working in a hotel. The reason he didn't say it was to confirm whether he could entrust his life to Goodman. After the game between the two, the male protagonist now has an answer in his heart, so he circled the location of the corpse on the map. After obtaining the exact location for the ride, Goodman slowly walked towards the window and looked at the opposite building, as if conveying a certain message to someone. If the story is just that simple, then this movie cannot be considered a suspenseful mystery group, and all the divine twists occur in the fourth part. The next 20 minutes will reveal the true story version and the shocking ending. The pace of this movie also noticeably accelerates. After being convinced by Goodman's perfect confession, the male lead reveals a chilling and shocking secret. Just as he was about to push the car into the lake, a few noises suddenly came from the trunk. The male protagonist opened it and saw that Daniel was still alive, but he had already reached this point and couldn't turn back, so the male lead felt like he would sink Daniel into the water. Many viewers here have a question: why does the male lead admit that Daniel was not killed but was pushed into the lake by himself? There are two reasons. Firstly, the male protagonist was convinced by Goodman's plan to blame Daniel's father for the murder of Laura and frame it as a crime. The basis for the establishment of this plan is that the male protagonist needs to prove that Daniel is dead, because only when Daniel is dead will his parents engage in retaliatory acts of murder and framing. To prove that Daniel is dead, the body must be found. Secondly, if the police find the body, an autopsy will reveal that Daniel was drowned. And at this moment, the male protagonist has completely trusted Goodman. He is worried that continuing to conceal it will affect Goodman for his own side, because Goodman repeatedly stimulates the male protagonist with trust and cooperation in explaining details. That's why the male protagonist said the following sentence. However, these words instantly angered me. Thomas. Faced with Goodman's provocation, the male protagonist became angry and embarrassed. Goodman suppressed his anger, regained calmness, and continued to engage in a game with the male protagonist. He suspected that the male lead was being deceived by a policy of adulteration, so he raised new questions about the entire story he had told. If his character is swapped with Laura in the story, the whole story will become more reasonable. Goodman assumes that at the scene of a car accident, Laura wanted to call the police but was stopped by the male protagonist. When he hid Daniel in the trunk, the male protagonist also took his wallet with him. Afterwards, with the help of Felix, he fabricated the illusion of Daniel embezzling public funds and fearing to flee, while Laura was forced into this uncontrollable situation, and the evidence was in Goodman's hands. This medical report points out that shortly after the car accident, Laura suffered from acute anxiety disorder, and his conscience was tormented to the point where he began to feel tired until he understood that the only way to let go was to tell Daniel's parents the truth. To compensate the two, Laura implemented a plan. He made an appointment with Daniel's parents to meet at the hotel where Daniel's mother works, and then called the male lead through a public phone booth, falsely claiming that the driver had discovered their secret and demanding that the two bring a ceiling fee of €100,000 to the hotel for a transaction. Then, Laura sent a scheduled text message in advance using her phone. After the male lead arrived at the hotel room, Laura told the male lead about her plans. At this point, the male protagonist's phone received the timed text message, and he finally understood that he had fallen into Laura's trap. Many viewers here couldn't understand why Laura had to use her own phone to send this message. Isn't this a blatant act of self-deception? And the answer is actually the opposite. This text message is crucial for the development of the entire movie. Firstly, from Laura's perspective, he tried to persuade the male protagonist to surrender, but after this car accident, he understood that the male protagonist could do anything for wealth and status. Therefore, Laura knows that there may be a risk of murder. With this text message, once Laura encounters an unexpected situation, the police can easily find the male lead from the text message. Out of this precaution, he also did another one. Nombre. Unfortunately, the male protagonist is very clever. After killing Laura, he happened to use this text message as an article, fabricating a version of the story of the driver extorting him and Laura. Finally, Goodman used this text message to fabricate a plea of guilt for Daniel's father's murder. Returning to the persuasion of Laura in the story, the male protagonist had a murderous heart and picked up the murder weapon on the table to kill Laura. At this moment, the tenant outside heard a commotion and came knocking on the door. The male protagonist was afraid and used an anti-theft chain to lock the door from the inside. But when he wanted to flip through the window and escape, he found that he couldn't open it at all. At this moment, he thought of the text message, and a fabricated story quietly formed in his heart. He immediately scattered the money all over the ground and smashed it into the mirror. After being attacked by someone for forgery, Daniel's parents arrived at the hotel and understood what had happened when they learned about Laura's death. However, the male lead raises a question: if Laura has already told Daniel's parents the truth, why haven't they told the police? Goodman provided his own explanation. Goodman brought the male lead to the window and pointed to the second to last floor and second window of the opposite building. The male lead took a closer look and realized that the man across from him was actually Daniel's father, who was monitoring the male lead's every move. Goodman said that he and Felix were also being targeted by each other. Out of curiosity, he began investigating Daniel's disappearance and accepted Felix's commission to take on the case. But the male protagonist feels that blaming Laura's death on Daniel's father is more credible, as Daniel's mother was present at the scene and Goodman told him to overlook the details. Originally, at the time of the incident, Daniel's mother was not at work because she and her husband had arranged for Laura to go to the hotel. Upon careful observation of this photo, one will find that there is no reason for him in the mirror, which means that this photo is actually a forgery, so this set of testimony is completely flawed. The male lead was greatly shocked and deeply impressed by Goodman's ability. I almost heard the tinnitus in this area as a flaxseed chase. At this moment, Felix's phone message came in, asking the male lead why the phone couldn't be reached. However, Goodman suggested taking a 10-minute break on the grounds of going out to breathe. Before leaving, the male lead even said to him, "Thank you, gentlemen." Later, the male protagonist took out his phone and found that it had been turned off. He was completely unaware of the seriousness of the situation. After he called Felix back, he was told that he had already paid for the driver. The male lead praised Goodman very much. "Podemos confiar en ella?" However, just as Felix was questioning the prosecution witnesses about what was going on, a piercing sound came from them, and their communication signal seemed to have been disrupted. The male protagonist noticed that the pen in his pocket was leaking. When he placed the pen on the table, he found that Woodman had written 5 words in his notes: Knopf, the murderer; Justice, the scammer; and the arrogant and impolite male protagonist. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. He suspected that the reason why his phone couldn't get through was because Goodman and Felix had turned it off after talking to each other. And when he twisted the pen open, he was even more stunned, as a bug was installed inside the pen. At this moment, Goodman has arrived at the opposite building and handed over the map marked with the dumping point to Daniel's father. At this moment, a car slowly stopped at the hotel entrance. As the countdown to the trial ended, Daniel's father finally completed the evidence collection, and Goodman's identity was officially revealed. I saw him slowly pull down a human skin mask, take off his headband, and put on his glasses. Turns out he's actually Daniel's mother. Do you remember the 2 foreshadowings that the director laid before? One is that Daniel's father once revealed that his wife is a very skilled theatrical performer. The other one is at Daniel's house, where 2 masks resembling human skin hang on the wall. With his superb acting skills and gentle persuasion, he was able to successfully deceive the smart and suspicious male lead. On the other side, the doorbell in the male lead's room rang, and the real lawyer Goodman followed suit. But it's already too late. Daniel's father has already dialed the police station's phone number. Eho! The curtain has also come to an end, and the divine reversal of the ending makes people exclaim 9626. Next, we will interpret some of the issues previously buried. The first question is whether the car accident was an accident or simply a driving accident. Answering this question requires 2 approaches. First of all, the male lead said that the lost section is the route. Why does the navigation suggest turning right? The answer is that although the lost road section is a route, due to the presence of wild animals along the way, in order to avoid drivers and control their safe speed according to legal requirements, the passage time is actually longer. The male protagonist, in order to exceed the sense of time, drove at a speed limit on a lost road section, which is why he hit Daniel so badly. Secondly, if this is an accident, why didn't the male protagonist who has the ability to ask the police to help forge an alibi choose to report the accident to the police and directly attribute the cause of the accident to the sudden emergence of the elk, risking a huge risk of self-destruction and destruction? Based on these 2 aspects of analysis, I am more inclined to believe that a car accident was a driver's accident. Next is the second question: why does the male lead's phone produce noise whenever Felix questions on the phone? At the end of the movie, the answer has actually been given. The monitor is hidden in that pen, and Daniel's father has been listening. Perhaps it is still a controllable signal jammer, as long as Daniel's father can control it. And Goodman's subsequent meaningful words further confirmed that noise can be seen as human interference. The third question is, who sent the package with the signature Daniel to the male lead? Is it Daniel's parents or Laura? Laura knows the approximate location of the body. It is possible that he told Daniel's parents. But I am more inclined towards the bait that Laura threw, with the aim of convincing the male lead that there are witnesses present, so as to persuade him to come to the hotel for a meeting. And as mentioned earlier, the director deliberately gave a scene where Laura enjoyed the scenery while filming, which is likely the foreshadowing laid by the director in advance. The fourth question is to explore the role of clocks and the importance of explaining details. Goodman placed that clock because it can play three crucial roles. Firstly, on the surface, it is to remind the male protagonist of the urgency of time, and secondly, to disturb his mind. Therefore, every time the male protagonist is considering whether to reveal the truth, there is always the sound of a second hand moving in the background sound. However, in this hanging situation in mid-air, the male protagonist urgently needs an ice block to cushion his feet, which gradually leads him into Goodman's trap. Finally, it is also a reminder for J. Goodman to pay attention to calculating the arrival time of the real Goodman himself. Next, let's explore why Goodman keeps reminding the male lead to explain the details. I think there are two reasons for this. Firstly, Daniel's parents ultimately aim to complete the evidence collection by handing over the recording and body dumping map to the police to report the male lead. Therefore, they needed the male lead to personally pick his feet and explain all the details of the incident. Secondly, the reason why Goodman was able to gain the trust of the male protagonist is precisely because of his precise grasp of details. Obviously, before the two met, Neil's parents, the male protagonist, and Felix had already deduced the case countless times. Therefore, in this game, the male protagonist had already figured out how to guide Goodman, and Goodman was also confident in how to counter-guide the male protagonist. He knew the entire process of the car accident through Laura, including the witness driver. This character is crucial for driving the plot forward, as if there were no witnesses, the male lead and Laura would have driven away directly, and there would have been no post-apocalyptic events. It was precisely because Goodman knew there were witnesses that he fabricated the claim that the prosecution had found them, causing chaos in the male lead's judgment and forcing him to seize the time to reveal the truth. Then, he took a step-by-step approach, first pretending to accept the male protagonist's statement, and using composite photos from the briefing to assist in launching a version of the story of Daniel's father's murder and framing. Then, he proposed a solution for the male protagonist, obtained the information he needed, that is, the location of the bus, and finally spread the truth, exposing the male protagonist's lies. The entire play is based on the utilization of details and precise grasp, and is completed in one go without any leakage. This is my basic interpretation of this suspenseful masterpiece. It can be said that the entire film is exfoliated, like a garden with small branches of tranquility, allowing the audience to see through the shadows and flowers. Outside the village, the structure seems familiar, but gradually enters a better state. It is a crime suspense film worth savoring carefully.